Around 8:30 a.m., having picked up the last survivors, the Carpathia cruises around the crash site for some time looking for survivors, but it doesn't find any, so it just exits the area because they are hoping to leave the ice field before sunset. And at the same time, a worship service is happening inside and the passengers have been removed from the decks. The Californian, on the other hand, decides to stay back and search for survivors or bodies or whatever they can find. At 9 a.m., Captain Lord messages that he was unable to find any survivors or bodies and is now returning to his original course to Boston, Massachusetts. A few hours later, the doctor has bad news for Captain Rostron. The man brought on board unconscious, able seaman Lyons is no more. So around this time, Mr. Ismay sends a telegram to White Star Line's office in New York informing them that the Titanic has sunk. But something interesting to note is that he signs his name as Yamsi, which is basically Ismay spelled backwards. We don't know why he did that though. But later he sends a second telegram which won't be transmitted till 17th April because Cottam was really busy. He had so many messages to transmit. And this message basically says that if possible they can hold the RMS Titanic in New York till Friday daylight so he and the surviving crew members can quote unquote escape back to England. Then he also sends another telegram to the cable ship Mackie Bennett to recover bodies. At 2 p.m., Captain Rostron contacts Captain Haddock of the Olympic, who suggests transferring the survivors onto the Olympic, but then Rostron and Ismay decide not to do that because they don't think the survivors have the physical and mental strength to even see a look-alike of the sunken Titanic, let alone board it. And he instead tells him to stay away from the Carpathia's visibility range. So Haddock's ship stays stationary for the next day due to its wireless range, and because of this wireless range, it's acting as a middleman sending Carpathia's messages to shore. At 4 p.m., a gangway door is opened. Father Anderson recites the prayers over the 4 bodies, all men. They're shrouded in sailcloth covered with a Union Jack. Once the prayer ends, the sailors take off their hats and the bodies are committed to the deep. Some passengers on board can't bear the sight and look away. Now there is a number of debate on the number of bodies, but here's the thing, they're mostly estimates. Some go as high as 8 while others go as low as 6. But then Rostron in the inquiry mentioned that he had a list, though not with him at that time, according to which he said there were just 4 men, and he said 3 were bought dead and the 4th one died after being brought on board. He was alive when he was brought on board. And Chief Purser Brown and Officer Bissett also say the same thing. It's just that in one inquiry, Rostron said the person who died on board was a crew member, whereas in the other one he said it was a passenger. But either way, these 3 people agree that only 4 were buried at sea. So I also go with the opinion that 4 were buried, not more, not less. Now, you should know that there's, the identity of 3 of these bodies is confirmed. There was the steward Seibert, able seaman Lyons, and first class passenger Hoyt. But the 4th body's identity, however, is a debate. That's because Colonel Gracie, who saw the body, said he was dressed like a crew member. Harold Bright said it was Jack Phillips, but later he changed his words, simply saying he heard from people that Phillips was buried from the Carpathia, but never saw it himself. And it's worth mentioning that there's actually a lot of debate whether Phillips even managed to reach the collapsible B or not in the first place. And the 3rd, which I believe is the most likely true candidate as well, is a Russian passenger from the 3rd class, David Livshin. And you should also know that 5 bodies is also totally possible. And that's because we know the Carpathia was carrying a passenger named Franz Wilworth. And this guy was being deported from the US. And we do know that he died at sea, but there are 2 points about him which we don't know. Number 1. Did he die during the voyage from New York, or did he die while returning to New York? And was he buried at sea? It's more than likely that he was buried at sea, because that's what happened back in the day. But if he died on the voyage from New York, then I guess 4 bodies is the reliable one. But if he died on the return trip, then 5 is actually possible, of which 4 were Titanic victims and the 5th was this person. On 16th April in the morning, the Carpathia encounters fog, and this is something which will continue every morning all the way till they reach New York. Later in the day, the doctors tell the captain that almost all the survivors have been nursed back to health. The list of survivors is also transmitted by the wireless. Now there are some things worth mentioning. Rostron had imposed some sort of censorship on board. However, there were 2 journalists on board the Carpathia with their wives, Carlos Hurd and Louis Palmer, Skidmore. So Rostron had ordered the crew members to make sure that these people do not mix with the survivors at all. And he ordered the wireless operators, who were already overworked, to give priority to company messages as well as messages from the relatives of people on board the Titanic, and ignore all the press messages. But despite this, Hurd managed to conduct some interviews and even deliver his findings to the newspapers even before the Carpathia docked. How? We will find out soon. So sometime during the day, an oil tanker had lost power near Halifax, and it was being towed to Halifax by the SS Asian. But at this point, what happened is that 2 messages got confused with each other. So there was a message from a ship asking if the Titanic is safe or not, and the Asian sent a message to another ship saying they are towing it to Halifax. Now they were towing not the Titanic but this oil tanker, but the operators mixed the news, and as a result many newspapers actually published misleading headlines, and even the White Star Line initially announced that the Titanic sank but no lives have been lost. So it was only after Captain Haddock relayed the messages from the Carpathia, the White Star Line issued a news statement saying, "We're sorry to announce, but there have been losses of life." And here are some of these headlines, some of those headlines you can see. At 11 p.m., Carpathia reports her position to Cunard Line as 596 miles east of Ambrose Channel Lightship. That night, the ship also encounters a storm which wakes up survivor Charles Williams. He rushes to the boat deck fearing the Carpathia has also struck an iceberg, but lucky for him that wasn't the case. On 17th April at 9 a.m., the Carpathia reports her position as approximately 500 miles east of Sandy Hook, and it's extremely foggy. Meanwhile, in the US, Senator William Smith announces that he wants to hold an inquiry into the sinking of the Titanic. He's shocked at what caused the ship certified seaworthy by the British authorities to sink with such a great loss of life. He was like, if you said it's safe, then why did it sink and kill so many people? But here's the thing. In order to do this inquiry, he needs to make sure he can get the survivors to testify before they disperse. So he takes his ideas to President Taft. And the thing is that President Taft's advisor and close friend Major Butt has also been lost in the sinking. So he agrees eventually. And sometime during the day, a US Navy boat intercepts the RMS telegrams which I mentioned earlier, sent by Mr. Ismay. These telegrams are sent to Senator Smith in Washington, D.C., and he takes these telegrams to President Taft. The President issues an orders that 2 US Navy sister ships, Salem and Chester, will escort the Carpathia into New York to make sure nobody manages to disembark before docking. Now it's worth mentioning that Officer Lightoller also recalled in his memoirs that their primary concern, they as in the crew members, Their primary concern at this point was to arrive in New York on time and just catch the Celtic back to Liverpool. However, this won't happen actually. And the reason behind it, you see, is because the crew members could lose their job if they testified against White Star. And because the IMM, which had a great influence, they would actually have trouble finding another job. So many crew members wondering what they should say if it fell upon them to show up at the inquiry. And ladies and gentlemen, this was the end of Carpathia's last full day at sea.